Okay, you have their bios, but I think one of the things that would be more interesting is to hear from each of them just how they got started in the field of environment and sustainability. Because they probably, if they're anything like me, were not sitting at Northeastern University planning this career necessarily. So I'd love to hear the story behind each of you and how you got into this field. Do you want to start?
Okay, sure, I'd love to start.
This is what happens when you sit next to the moderator.
The honest answer to that question is by chance. I got involved by chance. I started at the utility 25 years ago as an accountant, really worried about the debits and the credits and not much more than that. And as time went on, the company changed, as did the employees within it. And I just found that all of the energy efficiency programs we're doing, the focus on renewable development policy discussions around that were just really interesting. And so I involved myself, and that's the truth.
That's great. Wendy?
Starting when I was an undergrad geology major at Yale, I had the opportunity to do a lot of summer field research type jobs and forged relationships with people who were involved with the studies that figured out that acid rain happened. We're documenting the web of effects that was generating. We're supporting some of the early climate change research. And even though I was being pulled into going into a research PhD sort of track, I said, there's so much need for this information to be put into practice where shovels hit the ground and investment decisions are made day by day. So I was very interested in finding a way to forge a path to put this science and policy into practice. And eventually, in my mid-20s, is when I went into business, and it sort of took off with a life of its own ever since then. We just passed our 22nd anniversary.
Congratulations.
Can people hear me fine? There's rarely a moment that I could point to and say this was a definitive defining moment, but I actually can as to how I got into the space. Since then, the last 35 years of going from running nonprofits to being a lawyer to working in the Clinton administration as the regional administrator of the EPA to running an environmental investment firm. I'd argue those were more accidents. You know, you do one thing and you end up in another. But I do know that when I was an undergraduate student, I was a business student before I went to law school and business school. And there's this guy, and for those of you who are 20 years old, we'll even do this as a little test. Ralph Nader. How many of you know who Ralph Nader is? Only those under 25. If you don't, well, but there was this guy, Ralph Nader of Nader's Raiders, who was fighting for consumers against big bad companies as he saw it. The world is certainly not that simple. But somehow he tapped me. He found me amongst a group of students and involved me in a research study that was about elderly people being ripped off by hearing aids, people selling them hearing aids that really wouldn't help them because, in fact, they were stone deaf and you could sell them 27 hearing aids. And we did a research study using the academic background of the university and getting faculty involved and prove that it was indeed a problem. And he said to me, he was good at challenging college students to take on the world. Why don't you go to Albany, I was in New York State, and try and change the law on this issue? And here's a kid who's a sophomore at the University of Buffalo. What did I know about changing the law? But I went with, expertise that some of his staff gave me and walked around the halls of the General Assembly in Albany, and lo and behold, we passed the law. Got lucky, had some good sponsors. But the way that empowered me and the way I want the students in this room to walk out and understand and believe is that we each can change the world. But the power of, or the feeling of, I'm more than a student who goes to the library and studies and takes exams and gets frantic over it, that I can have an impact was an extraordinary feeling. And I still get excited about that feeling 37 or so years later. And everyone can make a difference. It was a turning point for me. It's the reason that when I finished my MBA program and everybody else was competing for the highest salaries at the biggest businesses, I was taking, rather than in those days, $50,000, but instead a $6,500 position at a not-for-profit organization. And I've never looked back. It hasn't made me rethink. It's only assured me that that was a good start to a very fun and exciting career.
Mindy, building on that, you've been in the space for 35 years. Some would argue 5 years ago, 7 years ago, there sort of became an inflection point of attention into the space, and that we are facing some of the most exciting times and some of the most challenging times in the space. What would you say are some of the greatest challenges that you're facing and some of the emerging trends you're most excited about?
Here's where I will say the positive directions are, and then let's go back to some of the challenges. But when I think about sustainability, about climate change, about the depletion of water resources, about the fact that we're a world community of 8+ billion people going to what could be 10.5 billion people, and the resources we need to allow those populations to grow and to have the kind of lifestyle we want, and the billions of people who will be driving cars, having microwaves, having laptops, and using more and more resources in a way that we've had the privilege of doing, the numbers don't add up. Can we sustain our world so my kids have the same future that I had and your kids do is very much in question. It is the first time in history where the next generation may have substantially less, not only monetary resources, but enough water, enough material goods, enough food to feed a world of 10 billion people. The exciting issues are that I would say over the last 5 or 6 years, the world has woken up that this is not only an environmental tree hugger issue of climate change being, those environmentalists care about it, but not business and not the economy. Maybe scientists care about it, perhaps even national security professionals. But as National Grid at their board level, looking at these issues and acting and building models around it. And not only is National Grid, and I'm going to let Marcy talk about the formidable work that they're doing, and it is quite impressive, but we now see capital markets realizing that sustainability issues are issues about building an economy, not only protecting environmental virtues, as if that's not enough. Perhaps it should be. I just came, and it sounds pretentious, and you could all throw apples at me. I just came from the World Economic Forum in Davos, and it's a very elite place, only 2,500 corporate CEOs and yada, yada, yada. But let me tell you what I saw there that gives me hope, and that's been part of this, let's say, trend over the last 5 years. I mean, there is no place that is more of a hub of capitalistic leaders. No value judgment, just the leaders, the chieftains of industry from every part of the world. There were 29 climate change-related sessions. Every one of them was oversubscribed. People were waiting around the corners. There were 12 private dinners on the issue. We had nightcaps. At Davos, they start you at 7 in the morning at breakfast meetings, through meetings all day, then 400 cocktail parties, then dinners, then nightcaps, as if anyone has the endurance to go to all those things or wants to. But the message throughout, again, not from the head of Greenpeace and not from the head of National Wilderness, but from Coke and Pepsi, and we hear it from National Grid, is that they can't run a business anymore without looking at sustainability issues as a material financial risk issue and opportunity, and they're looking at ways, and they're in fact setting goals for integrating how to reduce their carbon footprint, how to reduce their water footprint, how to look at a sustainability issue as a fiduciary issue, an issue their boards need to look at as a compensation issue. So the trends on thinking about this and acting within corporate America, within financial markets, are getting better and growing. And that's an important piece. We have got to change this debate from climate change and regulations to regulate carbon about the economy or about job killing. This is about building a future economy.
And Marcy, why don't you pick up on that and talk a little bit about, from the utility standpoint, it's a whole new world in many ways for the utilities as a result of some of these things. What are you seeing, and what are you excited about that the utility industry or National Grid specifically is doing?
Well, thanks for the question. And I have to say, Mindy is a massive rock star in this space. Yes. And the fact that she went to Davos makes me massively intimidated. Be that as it may. You are right. The the world has changed so much. And when I answered the question earlier about how I got into this space, it was sort of by accident, simply by my mere existence at National Grid. And we have a view around the topics you just discussed, Mindy, that the world is changing. So we might as well be a part of it. We could sit to the side and carry on with, making sure the power's flowing and the lights are on and the gas is flowing. On the other hand, we decided we could take a view about, well, how should the utility industry play in that space? What should the rules look like? What might the policy be? What do our employees think about that? How about all of the community organizations with whom we have partnerships? And so I think we really look at it from three dimensions. The first is, at the very cold business level, it's a business imperative. We could just go out of business if we put our head in the sand. So selfishly, there's a business imperative. We need to be part of it. We need to help shape it. And there's an adage that a former CEO drew a picture, sort of a mental picture. I shared this with a couple of you earlier. If you picture for a moment an Alaskan dog sled with a bunch of dogs out in front, only the lead dog has a different view, right? Everyone else is looking at something not so great. So we want to be that lead dog. And so there's a business imperative. The second is, it is a societal judgment around how do we want to make sure that we can serve 10 billion folks on this planet. And we know, because of the expertise we have in what we do, we have to be at the table to have those discussions. So there's the just moving society and helping that it's the right thing to do besides the business imperative. And then I guess at the third level, at the end of the day, regulated utilities are sort of quasi-governmental. We are public companies and we have shareholders, but at the end of the day, we're in public service. And so a thing that's very important to us to make sure we're always looking at is economic development, workforce development, job creation, and there are lots and lots of jobs to be had in this space, and we want to be able to help provide them. So it's a quick answer.
Yeah. And Wendi, you sometimes spend a lot of time and effort looking at some of the negative consequences of whether it's deep water or other things, and then helping to mitigate those, and really end up really thinking a lot about the consequences of our behavior and things like that, and how we can do the right thing and do it better and smarter. What are some of the challenges that you're facing in looking out at this changing world from your perspective?
I would say, to really echo and add some additional angles on the messages that Mindy and Marcy had, there's both a positive and a negative side of it. I think it was really easy, as recently as a decade ago, for people to see you had to have a doom and gloom sort of cry before you had a message about something environmental. And it was a us against them, the green hats versus the black hats kind of dichotomy. And now, more and more, all of these issues both pose challenges that anybody who doesn't grasp them, including risk to communities, risk to ecosystems, risk to companies, risks to governments, and to families, there is that downside. But the flip side is, wow, now that we're having this wake-up call and we're experiencing these drivers, there are a series of whole new ways to frame the problems and go about solving them. And in fact, there are better solutions than the prior generation. So we're all getting propelled to not just react, not just be forced into something, but to have our eyes open to a next generation of solutions. And a lot of our work has tended to be driven by some disaster, some impact, and some need to come up with a solution, especially related to storm damage, floods and river erosion, coastal storm surges. Our biggest activity, which is really just in the very winding down phase right now, is tied to the planning and engineering and program management of the $14 billion infrastructure program that now shields New Orleans, not only from the storm that hit it in 2005, but actually for all the anticipated future types of storms and land subsidence and sea level rise impacts that the best international team of scientists and engineers could foresee. So it's actually carved out a new way to understand risk, to clarify the things that we don't want to have happen, and to find ways to take steps now, not just in theory, not just as a matter of policy, but to engineer it, to build it, and to justify and get people rallied behind getting it done. And it's funny, one of the military officers that was in a responsible role at the kind of initiation of all that, he gave me a call this week, and he was sort of reminiscing about how great all that was. And I said, well, you do know that the vast majority of the world actually still doesn't even know that any of this happened, partly because everyone working, it all happened so fast and with so few newsworthy moments, namely conflicts and problems, that so many people don't know that we have this that we have the world's most advanced infrastructure, and it's right here, it's recent, it's affordable. And when Hurricane Isaac bore down in 2012, it saved more than twice its cost. You know, it avoided over $30 billion of damages. So there are these models that I think are ultimately incredibly positive.
One word that's been used by all three of you in different ways is opportunity. And we have a group of students, we have people who are professionals in the sustainability sector or people who may want to be professionals in the sustainability sector. Where do you think some of the greatest opportunities are in this industry? And what are you watching and excited about? And if you were providing career advice, where should people be looking and paying attention?
Well, if we believe the issue or the challenges of climate change, global warming, whatever you talk about it, are real, and that we have to tame it, and we've got to bring our carbon footprint down, that is going to require the most major change in our energy supply system that anything we've seen. It will be revolutionary. All of the numbers we see say that by 2050 we need $36 trillion to build a clean technology energy system. So that's right now we see about $250 million a year in clean energy technology, or rather $250 billion a year. The goal by 2020, $500 billion a year. And by 2030, $1 trillion a year. I'm sorry, we need $36 trillion. Think about the change in our energy systems that you would spend $36 trillion on. But if, in fact, every one of the scientists are correct, that's where we're going. So we can either fear it, we can ignore it, we can make believe it doesn't exist, because climate change may not show up tomorrow. It may be 5 years, 10 years. It gets more expensive to mitigate the longer we wait. And we could be like our children when they were 3 years old and they put their fingers in their ears when they didn't want somehow to hear something, to think it might go away if I don't tell my mother I wrote on the wall with chalk. But if we don't want to ignore those issues, and if we want to think about $36 trillion, it's a technological revolution, and it's very exciting, and being part of that is part of our future. I mean, the price of solar energy has gone down radically. It's now a game changer in what we're seeing. The kinds of energy efficiency, mundane, some people, energy efficiency is a massive opportunity. National Grid is doing an enormous job with leading on how to make sure that all kinds of buildings have access to energy efficiency and the right financing is there. Not all of these are dream technologies that we haven't yet perceived or conceived of. Many of those technologies exist. So when I think about $36 trillion, that's a lot of opportunity. Is it going to turn out to be 30 trillion or 80 trillion? It doesn't matter. The technological revolution has to happen. It is starting to happen. We're seeing change everywhere. And if I were a young engineer starting out or a young business person, that's the space that I would go to, because there will be opportunity that can only grow.
I'll add to that and just totally echo whether it's in the policy space, the business space, but also in that so important infrastructure space. A lot of the items, Mindy, that you just mentioned, whether they're solar, wind, CHP in your basement, everything that's happening right now is exciting, and we need to do a lot more of it. But what's even more exciting is all of the stuff we haven't even thought of yet. Mm. And if you think, just wind back 5 to maybe 10 years, and what's been new in that period, I promise you it'll be double that in the next 10 years. So that's what's exciting for me, and also the impact that would give. So just a quick factoid: under the Massachusetts Green Communities Act, there are some fairly aggressive, and I'm thankful that they're in place, some fairly aggressive mandates around the amounts of renewable energy, amounts of solar, energy efficiency, et cetera, that we as utilities have to help our customers engage in. And just in the last 2 years, we have somewhere north of 400 megawatts of power, solar, installed in Massachusetts. I recognize that may mean nothing to you, but put it this way, we need to get to 1,600 by 2020, and we'll do that well short of 2020. But 400 megawatts is the size of a small power plant. So what we've done as a community, whether it's something just on your roof, or maybe you have a business, or maybe you're a town and you put something on that old dump that's now been capped, the old landfill, we've avoided a power plant. And every time that keeps growing, that's how you're going to be sustainable. And that's the exciting stuff and huge opportunities, Susan, in that space.
Wendi, what do you see in your space? I would bet you are on the forefront and pioneer of some new technologies that are being put to work. What opportunity does that afford?
Boy, I'd love to tell you about my favorite sort of renewable energy efficiency, resilient, disaster-proof power supply. And it's almost a surprising mashup of infrastructure ideas. It's work that we developed investigating. So we didn't invent this technology, but we basically did a proof of concept working to support the U.S. Army to identify something that could work on military installations. Incidentally, it's a perfect fit basically for campuses especially, but really any multi-use neighborhood of buildings. And it's similar to the idea of geothermal, ground source geothermal, where in that case you're typically drilling deep holes in the ground and running a liquid through there and giving or taking heat from the ground so that you can trade it with your buildings using heat pumps. And it's all that, all winter long, you've got relatively warm groundwater, and with the miracle of the little heat pump device, you can very efficiently heat buildings. You can also cool buildings. Okay, so that's great, and some of you were nodding your heads, which is really cool. Now take this idea and say, if we looked around out in the streets here at whatever infrastructure lurks below our field of vision in any city already, do we have anything that looks like that? What might we have already that we could somehow tap and make use of to heat and cool our buildings? And it turns out we have these little things called sewers. And it turns out we wouldn't have to drill all those expensive wells. And it turns out that the sewage in these pipes is a very efficient way to, it's got perfect chemistry, in fact, for extracting and rejecting heat as you need to do. And it turns out that all the water pipes in our buildings, when you want a nice cold glass of water, you typically run your tap a little bit because that water has absorbed heat from the building. And when we run our dishwasher or a shower, we're putting a lot of heat down as well. And then we add biological inputs that themselves sort of cook that water. So we have this wonderful heat source. And some of the most promising technologies just involve transforming how we regulate and view and design and use our infrastructure so that our sewer systems can actually become part of our, in fact, the main element of our heating and cooling systems.
And I just need to add to that, besides that really cool technology you just talked about, there's methane that comes out of sewers and wastewater treatment plants all over the place. We're capturing that methane and cycling it back into our gas mains to basically recycle it. So it's fantastic. And all of these are new ideas that we weren't doing 10 years ago.
Well, building on that new ideas, Mindy, you get exposed to a lot of new ideas that you're seeing, and one of the areas of innovation in this space is actually in financing and how things are being financed and funded. And you talked about that $36 trillion. What are some of the innovations that you're seeing in the capital space that's helping to bring some of these things come to life?
Well, I'm going to first talk about what I'm not seeing, and then I'll talk about what I am seeing. I mean, one thing I want to say at the outset is, despite the opportunity, we're not moving quickly enough as a world community. So one thing we do need to see, which runs to risk opportunity, is policy. I mean, it is not enough to say national grid's a leader, which they are. I wish I had time to talk about an international meeting of their international counterpart that I was at that was truly remarkable. on the sustainability front. But there are leaders. There are many leaders. There's more and more examples of companies acting and integrating climate. But the bottom line is you need a level playing field, and you need a price on carbon to talk about finance. Carbon pollution costs money. It costs society billions and billions and trillions of dollars, but it's priced at zero. So when something's free, you get a lot more of it. We have got to stop and think about how to pass some kind of policy initiative that puts an honest price on carbon, so we have honest financial systems. Something costs money, put a price on it. And so we have a level playing field. And it's not just the leaders out front, it's everybody. And I think that will drive the finance system more than anything else. And until that happens, we're at a bit of a disadvantage. Now, that one other thing about the financial system on the tough side, and then I'm going to switch to what I'm seeing out there on the positive. Financial markets in this day and age, and frankly for the last 100, if not 200 years, are driven based on short-termism and getting shorter every day. Right now, it's even quarterly earnings or long-term. You know, people are looking and judging companies based on, let's say, their quarterly earnings. Well, if you invest hundreds of millions of dollars in sustainability efforts, it's going to be a 2.5 year, it's going to be a 3-year return. So your short-term earnings may very well take a hit, even though if you care about the company, let alone the planet, you're building a company that's stronger for the long term. That takes investments. But our financial markets drive the shortest of shortest windows. And if Tom King from National Grid gets grilled on quarterly earnings calls about why he just spent hundreds of millions of dollars on energy efficiency programs for every one of his consumers, which are good for the company, good for the consumers, good for the overall community, they may not see that upside in the short term, and that's all they care about. So how we move markets to a longer term view so true sustainability efforts could truly be factored in. And anyone who thinks sustainability doesn't have a cost, we call it all sorts of things. Right now in California, Southern California not only has a drought, but they have 17% of the water they need to run their communities and their economy. You can't run a vineyard, you can't run an agricultural industry, you can't see tomatoes grow or anything else grow. It's a huge hit to the financial bottom line. I was at the Gap last year when their cotton crop died in Texas because of the drought. A 3% hit to their bottom line. So we have got to be able to look at these issues over short, medium, and long term, because indeed they have a profound economic impact on our economy. And somehow thinking that these are not economic issues is something we do at our peril. So we've got some work to do. We've got to put a price on carbon. We've got to have policy initiatives. And the financial markets have to be able to start factoring in the true value of things like water, like climate change, that the value and the impact of that value sometimes doesn't show up in the next 10 minutes. But what I am seeing, I'm seeing fixed income, otherwise known as bonds, all of a sudden, absolutely from banks, from the insurance sector, saying we're going to invest in green bonds. We're going to put billions of dollars into green bonds. The Zurich International, or frankly European insurance company said at an event we ran last week, we're making $1 billion commitment to green bonds. So where we work to float bonds, it's going to be for infrastructure projects. It's going to be for projects that have a green influence. So it's going to be for a bridge built differently. It's going to be for high-speed rail. It's going to finance a new kind of technology, and I think that's a great thing we're seeing on the horizon. We're seeing more and more companies starting to integrate sustainability into their financial equation, into their bottom line. And they're looking at the end of every year how much money they saved, not only spent, on sustainability. So there's a lot going on in the finance sector. There's almost no Wall Street firm now that is not putting out analyst reports on the impact of climate change and water shortages and food shortages and what that means. The attention is there. The acceptance of the risk is there. We haven't quite moved all of those players to dealing with the opportunities every day.
And I think one of the things Mindy mentioned, for any of you who are in accounting or finance or things like that, there's even things as basic as they're setting up an equivalent to FASB for sustainability called SASB, a Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, just so there are industry standards by sector so that you know how to report out on these things in financial statements and things like that. So if you think that the only opportunities in sustainability are in the engineering, science, and technology, there are great ones, but as others have mentioned, policy, accounting, finance, math, et cetera. What are some other areas that you're seeing on the financing side or on the business side that are driving some of the decisions you all are making?
Well, I see it is a mixed bag, Susan, so I see both sides of the pancake. On the positive side, we absolutely need to have a regulatory framework where we can invest. I would love to. Today, I invest somewhere around $700 million annually on infrastructure. Honestly, I probably need to invest double that. The way the regulatory framework works right now, it doesn't incent me to do that. At the end of the day, I'm a business person. I got to do what's right for the company, what's right for the shareholders, while serving the customers. So I make the decision to spend the $700 million. So what I'm seeing, to answer your question, is that there is a growing acceptance that needs to change, but in a regulated space, and Mindy will appreciate this, it just moves at a bit of a glacial speed. So that's the sort of the not so great side of the pancake. The good side is they're seeing it, so it's coming.
Yeah. Wendi, you in one of the discussions said one of the things you have to do is a lot of silo busting and a lot of breaking down of these silos that may cause things to move glacially or may make it difficult to get things done. How have you done that, and how has that worked?
It's a very interesting thing because there are lots of little nicknames for the silos that happen. They often start in places like academia, where you have this department versus that department, and people who choose this track versus that track, and courses. I'm familiar with, I've been involved with some courses where it's even difficult sometimes to draw things from different departments. Then you move into companies that operate in this space but not that space, or regulations. Some that say if you're proposing this project of this description, one agency wants more of this, the other one wants less of it, because they're looking at it from these different angles. So the silos take many forms. They're very deep-rooted. They're very much part of our culture. And in a lot of respects, I think it's the problem. I have a friend I admire deeply who just retired from a federal career, who referred to these silos as cylinders of excellence, sort of everyone's own comfort zone and their sphere of control and competency. And, I think if we see them that way, we understand why people have them. You start to respect them. But the way to break through the boundaries and get people to think outside of their cubbyhole is, for instance, to think that building heating and cooling systems and sewer systems could actually be one and the same thing. They certainly are not regulated, nor budgeted, nor engineered by people who ever even talk to each other. But I chose that as an example to illustrate, because it's a wonderful, very concrete, very money-saving way of illustrating how and why, when you go across those boundaries, you can have these transcendent, surprising and extremely valuable outcomes. So I see that cross-disciplinary, cross-subject matter type of pursuit as being one of the most easily tapped new frontiers. And incidentally, one that, if you can handle the cultural change involved, yields a lot of its own self-financing mechanisms. We've seen that in many cases.
Definitely. I'm going to switch the conversation a little bit to personal careers and decisions you make, how you make them, things like that. So when you think back, each of you on the panel, over the last 12 months, what is one of the toughest business decisions that you've had to make in the last 12 months? Or if it's 18, that's fine too. But, how did you go about making the decision?
That's a trick question.
It's on the form.
Oh, yeah, I have a really bad answer. We've all probably read about some of the federal fiscal cycles and the problems that have occurred. And for many people, it's been something you hear over and over on the radio or TV. Well, over the last, especially since our huge amount of work came through post-Katrina, we went from being a very respectable small business to being a mid-sized player on the national scene, and we actually were doing very well with having a lot of additional contracts coming in and work being teed up. And both in the run-up to and in the final period of the shutdown, we basically had to let some really key people go, and to lose the team that had assembled this, not the whole team, but we had to drop some people who represented essentially some best-in-class, game-changing accomplishments. And so, in terms of a business decision, you got to do what you got to do. But in terms of hard decisions, that one was, if I were just making decisions on a strictly short-term cash flow basis, some of those people wouldn't have stayed on as long as they did. But this is also where we are in terms of our political process, and maybe I think people's failure to recognize at every level. It's been true with academic researchers. It's not just my firm or people in my industry. This sort of lack of coherence and lack of reaching good resolutions politically is causing a lot of problems, a lot of inertia.
So I run a not-for-profit. I don't run a business. Some of the issues are the same, some are different. Yes, we've got to be solvent. So for me, how do I feed 70 people and make sure that the $10 million organization is well run? But we also struggle, as businesses do, with all sorts of political issues. Where do we weigh in? Where do we not? What's the issue? And it's interesting to watch the so-called environmental movement and how it evolves. I think that the Keystone Pipeline has become a complete controversial you versus us, bad versus good, the bellwether issue of whether President Obama is doing a good job on the environment or not. And I found that to be perhaps the wrong issue to make the issue of the day, where we divide the community entirely and butt heads, rather than how do we help President Obama, whether you're Republican or Democrat, West Coast or East Coast. We got one president. We've got 3 years left. He cares about these issues. If we don't stand up and rally behind him to make sure that we're able to move an agenda around taming this climate change monster that's growing every day and dealing with some of the sustainability challenges. And I think that our community probably chose the wrong issue to divide the world, to call the president on the carpet, to chain themselves to the fence outside the White House, rather than, is this the moment of time we could come together and really move these issues? The preposterous situation of clean air and clean water and safe environments for our families and children being something that only Democrats should care about versus Republicans, or East Coast versus West Coast. I don't know how we got here, but it is extraordinarily important that each of us walk out of here and think about how we unite a world around the fact that we want a safe world for our kids. There's nobody of any political stripe who wouldn't throw themselves in front of a bus for their child if a bus was coming at them. But we're not throwing ourselves in front of this speeding locomotive called climate change when we need to. We've made it a political issue when it is not. It is about the future of our world. It is about national security. It's about public health. And we've got to be mindful of not allowing these issues to stay divided and disparate, and we versus them, and good guys versus bad guys, and Brookline, Massachusetts versus Worcester, where only Berkeley cares. We've got to come together as a world community. So for me, I tried to get involved, but the fact that our community chose a certain issue to help divide, rather than what we need to do to unite and to make something happen over the next 3 years and beyond, was an unfortunate time. And I think we've got to come together and still say, hopefully at tonight's State of the State or State of the Nation or State of the Union, we'll hear words about what we believe in. And I believe we will hear. We've gotten some early information, nothing that secret. that the president will make climate change one of his priorities, and he will want to address it not in the United States Congress, but in the administration, where he's got regulatory authority from energy to commerce to the EPA, and he will not be able to make progress unless we unite around him. And I think that's the agenda that we should all be thinking about as we walk out of here.
So the question was, what was the toughest decision in the last 18 months? And though there are many frustrations similar to the ones that both Wendi and Mindy have talked about, mine is really much more close to home and almost parochial. But probably for me, one of the most difficult decisions we made at National Grid over the last 18 months or so revolves around some of our internal computer systems, and the impact that they had on our employees. For me, we made some bad decisions at the company, and both in timing and how we implemented them. And though this may sound completely unimportant to you, the bottom line is this: we impacted 16,000 employees and made many of them have a really bad day for about a full year. And at the end, what happens when you do that is it's not a fun place to work. Although, just so you know, prospective employees, it's changing. So it doesn't become a fun place to work, and you don't get productivity out of employees, so you don't get a lot of what you just come to work so juiced up to do every day. You get there and you go, oh, right, then my computer's broken again today. So it's just about an internal thing, but I have to tell you, for me, it was massive because my passion around employees and development and engagement is very real. Jake, my friend, is sitting right here in the front. He will tell you it's the biggest thing that I care about, but not just because I want to see everyone grow and develop, but because selfishly, back to being that cold business person, I know a good, happy, engaged employee will produce a good result.
Exactly.
So, and I really wish we hadn't made that mistake, but we did.
As someone who runs a company that specializes in employee engagement, it really does make an enormous difference. And one of the things that I hope you in this room take to you wherever you go to work is engaging employees in sustainability and CSR initiatives is showing to have a huge benefit on the bottom line of the business. And those companies that are investing in employee engagement around sustainability and responsibility are outperforming their peers on stock market performance and profits. So it's a huge issue, and that's exciting. It's a neat place to be. Let's talk about mentorship and our experience with mentors in our careers, and how you may have found a mentor, or how they may have found you, or you may have stumbled together, and what advice you would have about mentorship for folks in this room.
Well, I spent the day today at a 6th out of 7 sessions with Bridgespan, which is a consulting firm that consults with nonprofits and hospitals and large institutions on management and management systems. And generally, I'm allergic to those things. I always feel like I need to be working, not going through training. And that's a shortcoming that I have, because training is crucial. And we talked today about 2 things. One about fundraising and really how to think about it beyond the mechanics of doing it, as well as human capital, and the importance of human capital and the importance of developing staff. I think the key, mentorship has been, having mentors within our organization at different times has been extraordinarily valuable. I think you need to make it a formal part of a program. Don't expect employees who are young, who don't know the organization, who don't know the boundaries, who don't know what they can ask for or what they can't ask for, to somehow go tap somebody on the shoulder and say, could I learn from you? On the other hand, think about the value to an employee outside of their little work unit where they're producing for their boss, but having them be able to work for another leader within the organization, how much it builds the employee, how much they learn, how much they grow from it. So I think they're great programs. We've had superb responses. But the more they could be institutionalized, the better, rather than anecdotal and happening when somebody takes the initiative.
What about you, Wendi?
I can mention that long before I really thought or got anybody's advice about how important it would be in my early career to have mentors, one of the things that happened is I got pretty plugged in first with one and then another and then with a third professional association. And it just happened that I developed mostly male, but in one case, a really amazing and almost unique woman leader in the organization who kind of just started mentoring me, and the relationships all, happened organically. And then at some point along the way, I realized, oh, look, it's happening, and now it's my turn to cycle around and give that back. So I guess in terms of the value, it is huge. I think that both being mentored and being a mentor brings all kinds of insights and networks and realizations that have tangible value. Plus, I just think it's the right thing to do, and it's yet another form of engagement, which in itself is just intrinsically motivating. And I think for those who are especially students or early career professionals, I would say go forth and go doing what you do with organizations or other affiliation type groups that you gravitate to, and then just try to look around and say, where's the mentoring happening? And I encourage you to just feel what happens, as opposed to going out to like interview mentors or try to do it with too systematic approach. But once you have the relationship that clicks, cultivate it, cherish it, and keep it going as long as it can possibly last.
I love that answer. And there's probably nothing more annoying to me than someone running up to me in the hallway with their blank piece of paper and pen and saying, Marcy, will you please be my mentor? Because, if you don't even know that person, I just sort of question the genuine nature of their query and their requests. Instead, letting it happen, whether it's through organizations or what have you. We are actually fortunate enough to have a formal mentoring program at National Grid through our HR department or through some of our Women Empowered or Women in Networks and different groups that we have. So we do that, and I've been both a mentor and a mentee, and it's definitely a two-way street. I will always tell employees of any stage in their career, try to find someone to have as a mentor. And it's not just because your early career and you need to figure out how to navigate the organization, but throughout your career, you end up with questions and just, things you want to bounce off of other people. So it is desperately important. I guess my advice to you is don't be the person who's a little bit too eager and runs up to someone in the hallway. Find someone through a different means where you might already have a relationship, and then it will actually, I agree with you, it will totally just happen.
Exactly. We have one last question before we're going to open it up to the audience. So I'd love each of you to take 1 minute. If you had a chance to speak with everyone in this room one-on-one and give them advice that's going to inspire them to go that next step in their career and in the field, what would you say?
Sorry, you dropped your mic. Okay. There's issues. I don't know how inspiring this will be, but it's sort of how I live every day. And I would say there are really three things. Create relationships inside and outside the company. Whether you think you really need that or not, something will happen and you will need that relationship. So create relationships. Secondly, communicate transparently as well as you can, broadly, and say thank you a lot. Show appreciation in how you communicate. And the last thing I would say, and this is particularly important to young women, I find, be your own best advocate. No one else is going to do it for you. You're in charge of your career. So just go out and, in the best way that you know how, I just make the assumption you all know your stuff, so do a good job, but then be your own best advocate.
I'll give some other sort of sweeping bits of advice I almost wish I had gotten articulated to me, just to build on that. First of all, really know what your passion is. If you're going to be innovative, if you're going to be persuasive to help motivate others and galvanize actions in whatever capacity you choose, you have to be radiating what you believe in. And so you have to really find out what that is, and when it resonates with you, feed it, build on it, and feel comfortable about that. I think it's always good to surf the wave between planning and having a clear and thought out plan of attack for your career path, but also remaining completely open to the discoveries, the shocking or even disorienting things that turn out to be interesting or possible or not possible, and including things that might be disappointments or discouragements. Don't just let them get you down. Don't just bounce back. Bounce forward. Sometimes the things, I look back and some of the things that could have been the biggest discouragements in my career turned out to be the brand new doorway. And if I hadn't been stopped dead in my tracks, I wouldn't have even seen the door was open or that there was a door. So be ready. Yeah, be ready for those opportunities, and then follow your passion.
So I'm going to build on the follow your passion because I've been lucky enough to have been able to do that. Don't box yourself in. On the other hand, if you're spending 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock or 9 to 5 or 7 in the morning to 7 at night, you want to be doing something you believe in, you care about, and that matters to you and perhaps to the world. So find those opportunities. They exist. And it doesn't mean you need to run a public interest group. You can find them within an architectural firm or a large public utility. Find that the way to be excited about going to work every day is working on something you believe in that matters, that makes a difference, and the opportunities are out there. I know that the job market's tough. I've got a 23-year-old son, and he's telling me, I've got to be realistic. You do have to be realistic, and it's not that I'm telling him to shoot for the moon. But you've got to, the fact of the matter is caring about and wanting to go to work allows you to do better, do more, and follow your passion. Something else I would argue is just hold on to your moral compass. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. And whatever workplace you're in, whatever you're doing, you will always succeed. You will always be better, whether or not in that one instance somebody wants you not to sort of have the highest values and the highest moral fiber. Hold on to your values and let them drive what you do. And then work hard. You get noticed, it matters. And coming back to your passion, you want to work hard. You want to work harder and harder and harder. I still work 65 hours a week by choice. Nobody's putting a gun to my head, because there's a compelling set of issues that I want to accomplish in the short 68 hours or 65 hours a day. So think about what you want to do. Just don't take the first job. There are opportunities for educated people. You'll all come out with opportunities, and don't jump at the first one. Think about what you really want to do.
That's great. One thing I'd add is if you have not read Hot, Flat, and Crowded, there's a part at the very end where Tom Friedman said, this is the greatest opportunity if we were to embrace this, and that $36 trillion. And this industry needs you. It needs the world's best marketers. It needs the world's best accountants. It needs the world's best engineers and software developers and customer service people. And, if you are do all those things that this amazing panel is recommending, there is a huge opportunity in this space for you. And the opportunity to do well and to really do good at the same time is a really exciting one. And I know that's what got me out of the media space, where I felt like I was doing good, but into this is a feeling like your work does matter, and I think that's reflecting something Mindy said at the very beginning. It's question time. Go ahead and line up. I think there's a mic that's going to be put right in the center aisle. Is that correct? And the one thing I would just encourage you all is to remember that you need to ask a question. I know sometimes it's tempting to share, and that's great, but remember to get the question out.
Thank you, and hello. My name is David Biergen. My passion is healthy indoor environments. And, when I connect the dots, you've talked about energy, you've talked about productivity, you've talked about public health, you've talked about buildings. What I haven't heard is that we need to be careful that in our overzealous efforts to save energy, we don't compromise the healthfulness of the indoor environment. I've been monitoring the carbon dioxide levels in this room, and unfortunately they were a lot higher than I saw. And this is especially scary because in a world with an unstable climate, viruses seem to be mutating at a faster rate. So we've got this threat hanging over us of respirable contagious viruses, and we're doing a poor job of ventilating our buildings. So I was wondering if any of you have any comments about how we can also include that issue of healthfulness within the overall umbrella of sustainability. Thank you.
I could chime in with a pretty interesting case. I mean, I agree with you, and there are plenty of documented examples where, shoring up a building envelope has led to things getting so stifling that some things that are good for health and well-being and productivity, sadly decline just as the energy efficiency goes up. So actually, this is why you have to have a wider multi-parameter view of things. There isn't just one parameter you can chase and maximize. It's all about optimizing the system, which sort of underscores the importance of this whole approach to systems thinking, which is part of silo busting. The military, if you had asked me 25 years ago if I'd ever be really interfacing with the military, let alone loving it, I would have told you were crazy. But the military, the U.S. Department of Defense has probably been one of the most strident endorsers of sustainable design. And they have many, many reasons for doing it. And one of the things they've really developed some great protocols for is indoor air quality and loss of downtime due to, allergies, sick days, and general reported comfort level. And there's actually a whole suite of techniques. I could give you more specs and information on this, but there's a whole suite of techniques, and it's daylighting provides sort of natural UV disinfection of air and surfaces. There's all kinds of air recovery that's really efficient, but putting a little static charge filter actually makes it much cleaner than any other form of air. And anyway, there's a whole series of little technologies that if you actually do it all and think it through and design it like you mean it, you end up really, there is a sweet spot where you actually can have it all, and it saves so much money it pays for itself with typically a 1.5 to 3.5 year payback period.
I would also add that our sustainability programs that we run with companies, health is core. About 25% of the programs are health related, and they're the most popular programs among employees. So when you look at what actions people want to take, they often start with health. And I often refer to environmental health and health as the gateway into sustainability, because it's a much, more tangible thing in some ways for people to get their heads around. If I do this and then I'm healthier, that's good. And it takes a while to understand systems thinking. So health is a very core component of a lot of different of the sustainability initiatives we're familiar with. Next question.
Thank you. I've been in the environmental space at the border of air quality and energy for a long time. And health, in fact, is what got a lot of people mobilized around environment for a long time. But the question is directed mostly to Mindy and your Ceres organization. But the other folks on the panel may have some things to offer on that. Exactly where is Ceres hoping to invest so that something like the carbon price does happen and people wake up to how we need to change things in the next 3 years? The techies and the answers are going to be coming for. I love watching them all, but the urgency of the problem. I was curious about where Ceres is trying to focus and invest your energy, and also where we all should be investing our energy. The XL Keystone thing, or the Keystone XL, disappointed me also. Even the fossil fuel divestiture programs. I mean, if you go and you hit Duke Energy or National Grid because they use fossil fuel power, they sell it to their people. So I wanted to know, number one, because you've looked so hard at the policy and how to change things and make that work. Where do you think the best payback's going to be for your investment? And in fact, if we want to make changes in the next 2 or 3 years, what kinds of groups and teams should we all be on?
Right. Well, in the end, I think we need to see massive changes, not anecdotal changes. I could tell you about 100 corporate boardrooms I've been in the last year and a half, and the great national grids and Unilevers and IKEAs and the companies I saw last week in Davos, Switzerland. But there are 60,000 companies we want to hit, and the only way to get at that is to have a policy change. Now, we all live on this planet, and we know that the world in the United States Congress right now is logjam beyond anything we could imagine. But we do have an administration that wants to move regulatory change, and I think we have to make that happen. So policy change to have a level playing field, to either put a price on carbon or to start changing things is crucial, and I think we need to help make that happen. Think about the regulatory change. The EPA said, we're going to double fuel economy standards. We're going to take the average fuel economy standard for each of our cars from 27 to 54%. We sat in negotiations with the auto companies, with financial players, with environmentalists. We were able to move that forward because of a coming together of all the diverse parties. And it's one of the greatest changes that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years. We've passed fuel economy standards. We could pass regulations that regulate coal-fired power plants, both present plants and future plants. They're being considered now. There's a set of regulations that came out of the EPA that regulates future power plants. This year, the EPA has to work on present power plants. My understanding is that tomorrow, the day after the State of the Union, there'll be a new organization of industry groups from across every sector that are going to try and kill those regulations. It is going to be a high-pitched battle, but if we stand up and if we work together, and not just citizens, I mean, citizens need to be, constituency groups, business leaders, we can see that change, and it will make a huge difference. We cannot sit and wait for it to happen. We cannot expect there to be a change in the United States Congress. It doesn't seem like Congress is moving anything. On the other hand, we've got an opportunity. It is now, and we all need to find a way to support that and push it forward.
Hi, I actually just changed my question 5 seconds ago, so I'll try to articulate this. But I was wondering a bit more specifically, I guess depending on your industry, you have different measures of success and what success looks like in terms specifically of either your performance or your impact. And I was wondering, for me, it's really interesting seeing whether or not companies or enterprises that work in this space utilize environmental metrics or indicators to track their impact or success. And I was wondering if this applies to you guys, if you could touch a little bit upon what sort of metrics you use to determine your impact that you're having in this space.
I'll take a whack at it. Part of my compensation as an executive at National Grid is fixed, and part of it is variable. And the variable pay has all sorts of little KPIs and metrics that I need to hit. And one of them is the carbon footprint of my department. So the hard part is, how do you measure that? What's your baseline? How do you measure it? But what we've done, it's as much an incentive to make me as an employee feel ownership over the topic as it is. The company is certainly bought in, but we want the leadership to be, paying for, literally, for this. And Mindy sort of alluded to this earlier, from the board on down through the senior executive level. And my dream would be that every employee has this performance indicator. But right now, part of my variable pay depends on my carbon footprint as measured by how many times I travel, what space we take up within the buildings. And so it's hard to measure right now, and we're getting there. But the good news is, at least we're trying. And the bad news is, not a lot of companies try to do it, so we don't have any really cool ideas to steal yet. But when there are some, we will steal them. So that is really where we need to go.
I can speak a little bit about the metrics. For instance, we're a planning and design firm, but we also engage in research and policy development as well. We like to call it design of research and policy, as well as integrating that into design. So because of that, we have a bunch of folks who are things like U.S. Green Building Council lead accredited professionals. We were early signatories to the U.S. Green Building Council and also to the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. So these are ways you rate a project, and you kind of go through a checklist of attributes, and it keeps everybody focusing on some things that are useful. And we've got a lot of experience with that. But we've also had a tagline over the years, which is every project represents your next opportunity to transact sustainability. And we talk about the fact that it's when you put the shovel in the ground, it's when you spend money doing something, you have the opportunity to set in motion some kind of a ripple effect where the ongoing maintenance and operation of that facility will either, move things back towards a more sustainable baseline condition or maybe depart further from it. And we've talked about different sort of no kidding ways that that's true. And we were challenged. Again, it goes back to these military thinkers. They're like, surely if there's something that if you can do this for every kind of project, and we've seen that you can, how can you break that down into a cross-cutting universal metric that we could institutionalize? And the idea of doing that was so exciting. We're like, okay, let's all huddle up and talk about this. And we're about to publish a paper. And we've essentially used the much maligned value engineering process that many projects undergo. And in addition to doing a true life cycle cost analysis for projects of many types, we also side by side use an entropy analysis. And we found that by looking first broad brush qualitatively and then quantitatively, when you design, whether it's a building or a piece of infrastructure or the way to produce a product, if you do it in a way where you're reducing the entropy level of those various steps and materials and transactions, you organize the system so it is a silo-busted system, basically. It's the low entropy levels equate to well-organized systems where there's a lot of resource recovery built in. So that's our new favorite metric, and we hope you'll be reading about it more in depth.
Very cool. Next question.
Hi, I'm teach marketing and innovation here at the School of Business, and I'm putting curriculum together around sustainability. So my question is, what do you want our students to know? What skills do you want them to have? And what kind of programs do you want to see us put into place?
I'm just going to be honest. One of the biggest skill gaps that I see coming out of college graduates coming into the space is their ability to communicate better than mostly they do. I'm obviously not communicating very well myself right now. We need good writers. We need the ability to convey an idea in simple English, and we don't see a lot of that right now. That may be, with all due love and great respect for the engineering students in the room, we hire a lot of engineers, and sometimes it doesn't go hand in hand. But we need to have better communicators entering our workforce, particularly in that field.
Hi, Wendy, you said something that struck me about the building. I think it was, what was the number? $14 billion to build the infrastructure, and not a lot was said about it. Can you talk about low entropy? Can you talk a little bit about that, how that actually occurred? Because that's a very different phenomenon.
Sure. Okay. So when Katrina bore down on greater New Orleans, there was a series, I use the word series as opposed to the word system, which I'll use shortly, a series of an array of levees and flood walls and pump stations and whatnot. But they had never been systematically funded. Most of them had actually been engineered originally in the era of the slide rule. So there was a certain, and there were different standards, like literally the field of civil engineering as we know it evolved during the course of some of those things being developed. And so when, and people along the way came to realize what the gaps and vulnerabilities and insufficiencies were, and many fairly sophisticated and compelling requests had been submitted to our Congress, which it's never been a really great tool for sorting out priorities and assigning funding. So it had funded links in the chain, if you will, but not the chain as a unit. And so it cannot be said that that was a system when the storm bore down on it. It became clear that it needed to be a system, that it could be the canary in the coal mine for how any region needed to understand the weak links in its chain of both built infrastructure and preparedness with things like evacuation plans and communication strategies and so on. So I don't want it to sound like this is only about levees and flood walls or something. From a low entropy standpoint, you can actually characterize how well organized and how multifunctional different elements of a system are, or how the system itself can perform reliably under different predicted scenarios. So designing a system that would only work if a storm like this came from this side, like from the Gulf of Mexico, for instance, as opposed to from the river flooding. So, you know, this was a system that was designed to be responsive to tropical storms, river floods, mechanical failures, terrorist attacks. We always have to factor those in these days, and a whole host of other power failures. You know, a whole host of other issues, all of which have been observed from in one place or time, often at the same time. The other thing that got done there was making sure that many aspects of that system included bolstering the natural systems, the natural movement of sediment and water, the natural self-organizing properties of salt marshes and oyster reefs and things like this, and actually being able to quantify how much those natural gravity-fed processes of land maintenance in the Mississippi River Delta and the living ecological communities there actually, when you harvest ecological processes which are fueled by sunlight, you have an extremely low entropy system contributing at least partially to the maintenance and future adaptation of a system. So that's just a little example of what wasn't there, and then what got built was adding another $14 billion worth of features, each of which was purposefully prioritized to be multi-purpose and to furthermore be the first time in the US that any large-scale infrastructure system was actually engineered down to the last detail based on accounting for every known variable of sea level rise, land subsidence, wind speeds, you know, every last little variable you could predict. And I'll point out, the Corps of Engineers is using some post-Sandy money to take a slightly updated and regionally tailored version of that information and assess all of the infrastructures that exist in this region. And I'll just say it's coming up looking like a chain with a lot of weak and missing links.
That's great. Folks, we are going to break now for coffee, dessert, and things like that. But first, I just want to give the panel a huge hand. It was fascinating to hear this, and I think you have inspired this group of women and men. Thank you.